All right, guys, we have been using a regular number two pencil to shade. And if you look very carefully, very closely at a number two pencil, sometimes you will see this little HB that's out beside it. And that HB is a value on the value scale. And so now that you've kind of been able to learn how to control this pencil as a tool, I'm going to give you like the little cheat, right? Because if there's a cheat, I like to show it to you. So there is an entire value scale from 6B all the way to B, and then to F, and then to HB. That's the same as your number two pencil. Then H, and then you have 2H, 3H, and 4H. So the H's stand for hard, and that's where the graphite inside the pencil is really hard, and so it's very light, like these pencils on the right. And then as you get towards the B's, they're very bold. So think about B is bold. And so these little pencils, the examples, are much darker. So B is bold, H is hard, so it's going to be light. Your HB is your number two pencil, so it's right here in the middle. So we have some pencils that I'm going to let y'all use. The 4H is going to be your lightest pencil, so that's why it has a first on it, because we start with the lightest and work to the darkest. Then we have our HB, which is a normal number two. That's going to be your middle one. Then you have your 4B, which is going to be almost your darkest one, and that's why it has a third on it. And then your last one is going to be this ebony pencil. And this ebony pencil is only used at the very, very end. No one should use this pencil until I have looked at their drawing and given you permission to use this ebony pencil. There are some buckets, like some butter buckets over there. And there are some different eraser options. There's the good old pink eraser that we use for everything. That's a super, super good eraser. We have these fancy white erasers that are really good for those places on your drawing that you want to keep white and not have any of that black stuff on it. And then we have these erasers that kind of get pumped out like this that are really good for small details to pull back that graphite back out of what you're working on. So today what we're going to do is we're going to play with some of these values just a little bit. So if you will get a blank sheet of paper from under the table underneath the window over there, we are going to play with some of these pencils. So you're going to get a 4H, an HB, and 4B, and an ebony pencil just because we're playing today. Nobody get the ebony until I see your drawing for the major project. But for today, you can play with it. At the top, we're going to do some boxes. So I'm going to have a long, skinny rectangle at the top, and we're going to divide that into some boxes. So I'm going to put one box in the middle and then divide the right side in half and the left side in half. And we're going to label 4H, HB, a regular old number two pencil, a 4B, and an ebony pencil. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your 4H and you're still going to hold it just like I've been teaching you to hold it. And you're still going to do that scribble shading. So I want you to do that box, that whole 4H box with the scribble shading. The difference that you're going to see with this is that you cannot get this very dark. I mean, it's going to be light on its own. And so you're not going to have to work as hard to keep it from getting dark. Also, we can go over and over and over this, and it's not going to get any darker than what a 4H is. So when you were using that number two pencil and you kept going over it and over it and over it again, it would get darker and darker. This 4H is only going to get so dark no matter how many times you go over it. So it allows you to get really, really super smooth, which is what we're looking for these faces that we're going to end up drawing. So I want you to fill the whole 4H box with that scribble shading, but I want you to go over it 2 or 3 times to try to get it as smooth as possible. Remember, you want to start on one side of the box and rock your way over to the other side so that we make sure that we're filling all the space of that little box. Once you go over your 4H, remember we're doing light and tight scribble scrabbles. So light and tight, that's the key. Once you go over it 2 or 3 times and you're happy with how smooth it is, then we're going to move on to the HB. So the HB is going to be your second one, and you're going to do the exact same thing. But what you're going to find is even though we're holding it the exact same way that we held that 4H, it's a lot darker just because the graphite is a little softer. And so that paper is able to reach up, those fibers are able to reach up and grab it a lot easier than on your number two. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to scribble shade this box. And you're going to do the whole box. We're not going to do it one time. We're going to do it at least 2 times. 3 preferably if it's not smooth on the second one. If it's smooth on the second one, then I'm good for you going on. But if it's not smooth on the second one, make sure you go back and do a third so that we make sure we're getting smooth values on here. Remember, we're getting very close to our final face. And so this is kind of your last practices to kind of understand how shading works and how to get these values. So make sure that you're taking advantage of this time of getting these values super, super light and super, super smooth, because that's going to be what gets those gorgeous faces. All right, that's our HB. Now, next, what I want you to do is I want you to take a regular old number 2 pencil, the thing that we've been working with since the get-go, and I want you to hold it just like we've been doing. Do you see how that number 2 pencil is a little darker than the HB? Even though it says it's an HB, since we use these in school and we use them on those Scantrons to take tests and things that have to go through the machine, it's a little darker. The graphite is a little bit softer than your artistic HB is, but they're on the same scale. You can get to the same darkness. If you keep doing this HB, you can get as dark as this number 2 is. It just takes a little bit more layering and a little bit more pressure with the artistic HB. But we can get there with a little work. So once you've gone over that box once, make sure you go back over it again to smooth it out. You've been using this number 2 pencil, so you should be a pro with this one by now, right? Once you get it good and smooth, then you're going to go to your 4B pencil and you're going to do the same thing. And if you notice, this one's going to get a lot darker a lot faster. So even though I'm not putting any pressure down with this 4B, we're getting super, super dark, super, super fast. So these B pencils and this ebony pencil, you need to wait until the end to use them. Do not use these B's in the beginning. You start on the H and work your way to the ebony. And you're still layering. We're not just going to do this one pencil. We're going to start with the 4H and go to the dark and work your way to the light and then put these other ones on top of it. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. We're going to do a little object underneath this. But we're still taking all the concepts that you've been learning and applying them. We're just kind of using these little pencils to kind of help us a little bit to get these values a little easier. We're just trying to make life a little easier, right? Because I've been making it hard, making you use that number 2 pencil. But if you can do it with the number 2 pencil, you can do it with anything. So that's why I made you start there. All right, once we get our 4B, then you can take your ebony pencil, and your ebony pencil is able to get super, super dark, super, super fast. And so you have to be super careful with this ebony pencil because you will go too dark too fast for sure. And you can really ruin a drawing fast by using too much of this ebony pencil too fast. So be really, really careful when you're using this ebony pencil because you don't want to ruin your artwork. You want to use it lightly and build the values up with it. I love a good ebony pencil though. It can really help give that contrast to your artwork of the darkest dark and the lightest light so that you get that good strong contrast in your drawings. You don't want to just go through though and like do this with it. It can get that dark, but that's not what we're looking for. You're looking to build those values. And so if you do all these first and then you do this ebony on top of these, then all those under layers are already done for you and you don't have to go through and do so much with the ebony pencil. The ebony pencil is kind of like a last ditch effort to push things back and those highlights really stand out from that ebony. So it's a good tool, but don't overuse it is what I'm saying. All right. So once we kind of have our value scale figured out, we're going to take just our regular number 2 pencil that we always work with, and we are going to move down to the bottom of the piece of paper, and we're going to draw a big circle right here in the middle. We're going to draw a big circle. I'm going to put a light source, a little flashlight, on the top right. And then we're going to draw the corner of a table like so. And then if our light source is coming down like this, then our shadow is going to live within that space. And so we're going to draw in our little shadow. Now there's some different pieces that you have when light sources hit objects. You have this part, which is the main highlight. But then what happens is this light comes down and hits this object and bounces back up to the ball. And you have this other highlight that lives right here on the edge of the circle. Then this side is the lightest, and this side is the darkest. And then the shadow is always this darkness again here, so the darkest, and then it goes out to the lightest. So it's like the opposite, right? You pick up where you left off on the shadow. So what you're going to do is you're going to start with the lightest that you have, which is your 4H. And you're going to start in this dark area and you're going to work your way into the light area. So remember, I'm going to leave this little spot right here. So what I want to do is take my erasers and go through and erase all those marks I just made. And I just want to think about them. You don't actually want to draw them. You just want to think about where they go. But for the sake of you learning, I actually drew it so you could see it. So we're going to go right where our dark is, but we're going to as lightly as we can shade it. And it's so much easier with this pencil. I know y'all are going to hate me because I made you use that number 2 for so long. But I promise it was good for you. And I promise it made you a better shader because you had to learn to control this pencil. The more you can learn to control your pencil, the better you are at shading, no matter what you're using, whether it's charcoal or shading pencils or just a regular old number 2 pencil. So if you can do with the little, then you can do with the most. And we always want to make sure we can do with the bare minimum of materials before we get the super good stuff, right? All right, so I'm going to shade from the dark all the way to our highlight. And I missed a little piece right there. So I want to make sure I go back and erase that letter that was still showing through. Remember, you're doing scribble shading. You don't want to do line shading. It's going to be a hot mess on your face. So we want to make sure we're not doing that line shading. All right, so once I kind of do one layer, then I'm going to go back and do another one. This second layer is really, really super important because with this 4H, it's not going to get any darker, really. I mean, it may get a little darker, but it's really not going to get very much darker. All you're doing is smoothing out all these values, and this is when you're going to be able to make those light values super, super pretty. I know some of y'all struggled with those light values, and this little pencil is going to save the day when it comes to these light values. We're still holding it down where the eraser would be. We're still doing light and tight scribbling, but it just allows you to stay light and really fill in all those white spaces and really get those smooth, smooth values. I know it's going to look like there's not much going down on the paper, but trust that it's going. It's there. And you're just going to have to slowly work your way across it. All right. Now that I've still got this 4H, I'm going to come in my shadow right here. And I'm going to start mapping out this shadow with my lightest, because remember, we want to build those. Even though we know it's going to end up being dark, we really, really, really want to build those up. Remember to leave your little white reflective light, the little Cast highlight is what that's called. And then we have a cast shadow as well. So since we know we're going super dark with this, you don't have to be super, super careful with your scribbling because you know your shadow is going to be super, super dark until you get way out here on the edge. Then we want to make sure that we're really, really super light and tight with that shading. Because we're going to do a lot of building on this shadow. So this is the same thing you're going to do on your face, but the shadows are going to be in the recessed parts of the face, like in between the eye and the nose. It's going to be where the shadows are. And then the highlights, these parts, are going to be where the lightest part of the face are and where the highlights, where the light's hitting your face. And so it's the same concept of building these values, but you're going to be doing it on a face instead of this object, right? All right, so we're pretty much done with the 4-H at this point. You go through and do everything that's going to be a 4-H. If you were going to do the background or if you were going to do the table, then at this time you would want to go through and do that as well. You want to go through and do all your light values that you're going to do at once. So let's go ahead and put some values in that background so that we can get that highlight to really pop out, because it's all about contrast. It's all about, if you've got a highlight here, then you need something darker behind it, right? And so it's all about that contrast. All right, and I'm kind of doing big scribbles. You keep yours light and tight. I'm just trying to get time to move on so that I'm not boring y'all to death. All right, so now that we've kind of got our background done, our 4-H is done. We're going to set it to the side. We're done with it. So the next one in line is going to be our HB. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and do the exact same thing we just did, right? But instead of starting way out here in the white area, I'm going to come in just a little bit. Just a little bit from that white area. Just so that I get a little bit of transition there from the solid white into those values. And so what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to get darker, but because it's such a light graphite, we're going to get smoother and smoother and smoother the more we layer this, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for those really, really pretty shading values. This also helps you, those of you that struggled with getting enough layers, using these pencils will allow you to get those layers a little easier because you have to switch, right? And then you know you've got to do 2 layers with each pencil. And so by the time you've got, 4 or 5 pencils, you're getting that 8 to 10 passes that I've been, trying to get you to do with the number 2. I turn my paper a lot. It helps me a lot. Remember, you want to stop a little shorter than the time before with your shading. Once you do the ball, you want to come down to your shadow and you want to start building those values in that shadow. with your HB. All right, and then we want to come through and do that background again. So everything that you did the first time, you're coming back with this one and doing again, but you're just stopping a little shorter than you did the time before, right? So it's just like our practice. It's just like that value scale practice that we went through the passes of 1 to 7, and then we would come back and do 1 to 6, and we would come back and do 1 to 5. It's the exact same thing, but instead of doing it in a rectangle, now we're doing it inside of an object, right? The same thing like with your eyes and your nose and your lips. All right, so you want to do 2 passes with that HB, and then we're going to go to the next one, which would be a 4B. So on your 4B, you want to start really, really light, not putting a lot of pressure down on it, because your 4B is going to get a lot darker than that HB. It's going to automatically get super, super dark. So be careful when you start using your 4B, because it's going to get dark fast. No pressure, no putting a finger on top. Don't do that. Don't do it. Have everything resting under the pencil. All right. So then we're going to go through and we're going to start working on the shadow again. Everything you did the first time, you're going to come back in and do again the next time. So a trick is once I get all this graphite on here, if you'll take a blank sheet of paper to rest your hand on, it will keep you from smudging all of that graphite. So like if I'm trying to get over here to this side, but my hand's going to be sitting on that circle, then I just get a blank sheet of paper and put it on top of my drawing. And so that way I don't disturb all that graphite. It'll keep your hand from rubbing, because as you're rocking it back and forth, you're rubbing that paper. And so this is a great trick to keep your hands from ruining your artwork, because it will ruin it fast, and then it'll just look like smudgy finger, and then you've done all that work for nothing. And I'm going to ask you, why did you do smudgy finger when you really didn't? Your hand just kind of destroyed it, right? So don't let that happen. Use that tip or trick. All right. So now once I do that once, I want to go through and do it again. And I want to go through and do it again until I get those dark values really, really super dark. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and grab my ebony pencil. And I'm going to go into this dark area as lightly as I can possibly go with this ebony pencil. Now you got to be careful with this ebony, because it's going to get dark on you fast. It's going to get dark, real fast. So just be careful with it. Use your piece of paper to rest your hand on so you don't destroy your drawing, because you will fast. All right, once I get the ball done, then I'm going to go through and work on my shadow. You can really define this line that's right here underneath the circle to really get a good, crisp black line. And then you can work on fading that out with some of that shading. All right. And then we're going to come in and we're going to work on this background behind the circle. So what's happening is as we darken the darks and the lights become more lighter just out of contrast, it pushes the lights forward and it pulls the darks back, or pushes the darks back and pulls the lights forward. So you have that push and pull between the dark and the light, which is what makes things interesting to look at and gives it contrast. And that's where you're going to really start getting that realism, where things look three-dimensional and things look like they're popping out from one another or standing out from one another. So now that I've kind of gotten a little crazy with my ebony pencil and I kind of did a little line work a little bit and I caught myself doing that, I'm going to go back to that good old handy dandy 4H, and I can really start smoothing out some of those mistakes that I made with that ebony pencil, where you can see that line work, and I can really start smoothing that out and fading it out into the lighter areas. because you can only get so dark with that 4H, and so it's kind of your back go-to to smooth out. You always want to go back to that highest number H that you have, to kind of really go back and smooth things out and make them pretty. So I'm going to go through everywhere I can see line work, and I'm really going to use that 4H to really go through and smooth out all of those values. And I want to do that everywhere. If I have some line work, like you see right here, this little line work, I can take my eraser, and I can come back in with my eraser and like pull out those highlights that have kind of gotten smudged or messed up. To really pull back out that highlight so that we don't lose it in the chaos. Then I can take my 4H and I can smooth out this really, really dark back into that really light area, so that it's not quite so hard. This is called the cleanup. When you go back at the end and you really clean up these values and really make sure they're all fading and they're all smooth, the cleanup is probably the most important part of everything looking smooth, and all the transitions. You can't tell where one ends and the next one begins. Really, really super important to go back and do this one last sweep through over this. All right. So that's going to be your circle. If you will take a picture of this and submit it on this assignment, and then turn this into the bottom paper holder.